Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Bookwrights. This is Laika Diaz, your interviewer. Today, we have the distinct pleasure of speaking with Mr. James Matthew Sawatzki, the author of the timely and insightful new book, Fixing America: Essays on Domestic and Foreign Policy. From the academic discussion to the page, our guest today has dedicated his career to fostering understanding and engagement. This book draws on his experience and observation to offer original insights into our domestic and foreign challenges in America. Mr. Sawatsky, it's an honor to have you with us. We're eager to delve into your thoughts and the important ideas presented in your book.
One, thank you very much. Two, I know this isn't Stephen Colbert, but I look forward to sharing my thoughts with you. This, of course, is the book Fixing America, which looks backwards to me, but for you apparently is correct.
Yeah.
And the first thing I've got to say is I rushed to get this book out in 2024. And I was afraid it was only going to be relevant for at most 2 years. And I was hoping it would only be relevant for 2 years. But for some reason, the people of the United States chose to re-elect Donald Trump, which means this book remains completely relevant because pretty much every topic I cover quite succinctly in this rather small book of only 80 pages. I get to the point, because I was a public school teacher, is going to only be made worse by the current presidency for the next 3.5 years. And my biggest regret is I did not dedicate a chapter to tariffs, which are like the stupidest economic policy on planet Earth, which, by the way, are largely responsible for causing World War I. So, hi. When I retired from public education at the age of 62, I said, well, I'm going to take on a new classroom. And my new classroom is the United States of America and in the English-speaking world. So, fire away with your questions, students.
Thank you, Mr. Sawatsky. So, to first and foremost of our questions, so what inspired you to write this collection of essays, and why do you feel compelled to address this particular domestic and foreign policy issue, especially the current administration right now is Donald Trump?
Yeah. Sadly speaking, that is true. Now, and Elon Musk, who knew that would be a bonus? So anyway, this is, to tell you the truth, the easiest thing I could write immediately upon retirement, because this is everything I taught in U.S. government, U.S. history, and U.S. civics for 38 years. So it's actually extremely easy to write, and it was also extremely easy to get out as my first book and get it into the hands of the masses before someone did something dumb like elect Trump again.
So, Mr. Sawatsky, you also mentioned in your book about topics about policies regarding abortion, regarding housing, regarding education. So, there are recent issues right now, especially on this tree.
The first chapter after the introduction is about Trump and January 6th and why every single one of them should lose the right to citizenship. Okay, that's it. I mean, I give the mention of the metaphor to the fictional character, A Man Without a Country. What was his name? Philip? Oh, I got to get past that. Anyway, don't worry about it. It's The Man Without a Country, and why Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump, and Mark Meadows ought all be stripped of their citizenship. as well as 147 members of the Republican Congress. But go on.
So, further, to elaborate on these issues, what are your perspective as to this?
Well, first of all, I have been a political activist in my adult life. You might have heard of Senator Patty Murray. Well, I ran Pierce County, Washington State for her, and no statewide representative, governor, senator has ever been elected without Pierce County. And Pierce County is actually a conservative county adjoining King County, which is a very liberal county. And I can tell you, I grew up in eastern Washington State, which is an agricultural area, which, by the way, Tom Foley used to represent, who was House Speaker of Congress, until he lost his job in the Gingrich Rebellion, the Tea Party Rebellion, as they call it. And so I came from conservative turf, but I moved to Pierce County, which is still conservative turf, but I was well connected to the unions, and we turned out the vote for Patty Murray. And if you want the whole backstory on Patty Murray, I was there for every day of it. She literally used the slogan, a woman in tennis shoes, because Don Bonker, representative at the time for Washington State, dismissed her as a mom in tennis shoes. And so she embraced that as her slogan. And the 1992 election, and I was there, we elected 6 women to Congress.
So, talking about also conservative counties, Mr. Sawatzki, there is also pressing issues right now in United States that Republicans, liberals, and conservatives are working together, and the people or the citizens of America are very concerned on that. What's your perspective on that certain aspect?
That's a little bit vague of a question. Could give me a specific topic that concerns rural America besides trade, which I imagine is freaking the heck out of Iowa, given the 145% tariff threat on, China. And by the way, China is the #1 export market for wheat in the Pacific Northwest, as well as soybeans in the United States of America. So I really wasn't an agricultural child. I did harvest asparagus as a child. I did pick rye out of wheat fields in the summers in 104-degree temperature. And that, I don't know if you understand why rye has to be picked out of wheat, because the rye, if it's in the wheat, reduces the price per bushel that the farmer can get. But anyway, go on.
So I've just heard in news recently that several of our politicians who are liberals, conservatives, and Republicans, 81% of them are working together to again promote what is the policy right now of Donald Trump, which is American First policy.
Yes, that was the slogan in World War I, and that led to World War II. And as I used to tell my students, let's see, 2 strikes, you don't want a 3rd strike or you're out. And the most ironic, most pathetic thing Trump yelled at Zelensky, who is a worldwide hero, was, "Are you trying to start World War III?"
Yes, I've
Okay.
heard that.
First of all, the man doesn't read books. We've heard from military advisors he can't even read a press briefing. He insists on PowerPoints at most, which means he has the mind of a child, as is his vocabulary. I can tell you that as a certified English teacher.
Mr. Sawatzki, so you emphasize that there are several root causes of policy failures. Can you share
Yes.
an example from the book where you trace a persistent problem back to its fundamental origins?
So actually, the first chapter in my foreign policy book is called "The Powerless of witch hunts, Red Scares, Richard Hofstadter, UFOs, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, all of which are related to U.S. history. And they're all interrelated, believe it or not, because of the Puritans of the Mayflower. As I used to tell my students, the United States has a stubborn, Puritan, fundamentalist Christian heritage because every civilized country in Europe kicked the Puritans out. And they came here to create a new Jerusalem, a God's country. And sadly, that religious extremism haunts us to this day, including my 2 chapters on abortion policy. And the Catholic Church isn't even Puritan. They're pagan when it comes to abortion policy, because Thomas Aquinas basically stole the concept of the 4 causes of history from Aristotle and then baptized them and called them Catholic doctrine. And I think the reason Harris, who was an incredible leader and a brilliant woman, didn't get elected is because of latent racism and latent sexism that continues to exist in the United States. Again, part of the religious extremism that permeates far too much of the South and Midwest. So this religious extremism and fundamentalism in the pioneers of the Mayflower also led to a paranoia. And there is a latent paranoia in the United States, a suspicious of the unknown, because we're an immigrant society. And by the way, the Native Americans were their immigrants themselves at the last ice age, and we can prove that genetically. So the entire nation is immigrants, even the natives. And the bottom line is there's always a constant fear of the next generation of immigrants, okay? Because the most recent arrivals, I mean, have you seen Gangs of New York? That was Scorsese, wasn't it? Gangs of New York, where the Irish are coming in and the English were already established or fighting as gangs against the Irish. And that was one of the films of the 2 great stars. Anyway, Leonardo DiCaprio was one, and the other one, I can't remember his name, but he was the voice of Scar in The Lion King. Okay, go on. Your turn.
So, in your book, Mr. Sawatzki, Fixing America, it suggests a solution-oriented approach. So, what are some of the practical and potential effective solution you propose in the book that you believe have been overlooked by our government now?
Okay. First of all, failure to punish the criminals of January 6th would have established a precedent. So it would have been nice to have a precedent. And the cowardness of the Republican Senate from convicting Trump of 2 impeachments didn't help. But that's just the start. Then we get to homelessness, which is easily fixed. Finland has done so. And it only takes 4 or 5 pages to explain how Finland did it. And it could be done both on the state and on the national level. And by the way, there's actually private agencies who are trying to use some of the housing first solutions. It's just housing first. Finally, stop complaining about immigrants. I grew up in an agricultural community that was completely dependent upon Mexican migrant individuals, some of whom stayed and some of whom would return to Mexico at the end of all the harvest seasons. I mean, Wenatchee couldn't get their apples picked 2 years ago because there weren't enough people to work the apple picking. And you got to get the grapes picked now in Washington State, Napa Valley North and Walla Walla, Washington, where I'm from. And there's the wheat harvest to be pulled in. And now that's good paying money, by the way, but I don't know if you've ever been to the territory of Walla Walla County. By Midwest standards, it's a dangerous place to harvest wheat because they have to have tractors that can literally run at a 45-degree angle because of the hills. And yes, sometimes they tip over and people get killed. So in the Midwest, which I've driven through now 4 times, everything's flat. You know, that's easy farming. Walla Walla County is very fertile. The right weather, the right temperature, not too much rain because of the Cascade Mountains, form what's a rain shadow we call in Washington State. So the western side is very green, and the eastern side is perfect for harvesting peas and beans and asparagus and wheat and hops and all sorts of grains.
So also Mr. Sawatzki, do you have your own perspective to those recent issue also on drugs? There's a certain viral videos in that certain state.
I'm currently living in Portugal. And you know Portugal solved the problem? Decriminalize everything and have national health care. Socialism works. If you have national health care, let's say drug addiction is not a crime. It is a weakness or a disease, if you prefer. And the only solution to it is treatment. I mean, locking people up for drug abuse isn't going to solve anything. And by the way, the United States is responsible for the world's drug problem. I mean, if Nancy Reagan was right about anything, it's that we're the supply chain. We're the source of the money for the terrorists. We're the source of the money for the Afghani, Taliban.
Yeah.
If you stop buying cocaine in New York City, guess what? Poor people can turn to less destructive ways of making a living.
Yes, I agree with that, Mr. Sawatzki. So it's really, really big problem right now in that certain state. Hopefully, they will have a certain move on that one.
Well, I don't think we're going to get the Republicans or Trump to embrace the idea of national health care guaranteed for everyone. And, oh, by the way, drugs are no longer a crime. So actually, God, who was the congresswoman I was listening to on Colbert the other night? Anyway, she was saying that Trump leans with cruelty. He leans into cruelty. And that's what we're going to get for 3.5 years, which sadly means my book becomes relevant for another 3.5 years, which, to tell you the truth, since I don't make a whole lot of money on the sales, I would just as soon things got fixed and I stopped earning any money on this book and I wrote something else.
So, Mr. Sawatzki, you specifically mentioned as to the educators, students, engaged citizen as the intended audience. So, what do you hope these groups will have takeaways from reading your book, or what kind of conversation?
Let me tell you my favorite lesson plan every year was. I had a group of honors students, and I would give them the task of learning how to track legislation at the Washington State Legislature. And for a couple weeks, they would just study what the adults are talking about at the state capitol. Because my school was not too far from the state capitol. A bus could take us there. And they all came up with all sorts of incredible ideas. One of my favorite 2 young ladies was advocated for what California passed before Washington State passed it. And Washington State did pass it because of their efforts. It's called the pink tax, where products for women are like 10% more expensive than products for men that are identical. I mean, literally, a pink radio versus a black radio, the pink radio would be 10% more expensive. Okay? But the favorite part was tampons. Tampons were taxed as an extravagance, not as a necessity. Now, these are two 14-year-old girls, and they're there talking to 60-year-old men telling them tampons are not an extravagance, they're a necessity. So one of the female leaders of the House of Representatives in Washington State took it up for the next year and got it passed. So that was probably one of the better educational real-life experiences I did for a couple dozen years with my students. We would have them research a project. I'd teach them how to do the 30-second stand-up presentation, how to write a white paper, and how to present that white paper very quickly in under 3 minutes to anyone who would listen. It would be a secretary or an aide or hopefully a representative. They would schedule their meetings. We would all show up on the same day. I told them where to eat with the lobbyists because the lobbyists would be there. It's a capital town. It's like, Annapolis, Maryland. It's Olympia, Washington. I don't know if you've ever been there, but the campus is college size, and there's everybody with any influence all hangs out in the same place during the legislative session, which is like the second Tuesday in January until either March or mid-April, depending upon the year. Citizen activism is essential.
Yes, it's very, very essential towards also for education and towards also students and towards also the citizens of America.
My chapter in education, my solution is simple. Most teachers do not really excel at speaking in public. They're very loving people who are very competent in their knowledge. But the rhetoric, the performance that is necessary in order to maintain attention in this generation that is constantly distracted by media, they're not really good at. And the saddest part is the vast majority of them are scared crapless of talking directly to parents. They're afraid they're going to get yelled at. They're afraid they're going to get sued. Mostly, they're just afraid.
That's true, Mr. Sawatzki. There are several teachers also don't want to be involved also in that certain issues or certain fights or certain quarrels.
Right. They don't want to talk about religion. They don't want to talk about abortion. They don't want to talk about the military, except a lot of really good educators are ex-military. Yeah. And it's astounding how, they get the leadership skills in the military. They do their 20 years, they retire, and they actually become very good teachers because they got the leadership skills in the military. So I was anti-military as a child, but I got to tell you right now, some of my best colleagues, most competent colleagues, were military retirees.
So to move on, Mr. Sawatzki, the summary suggests that readers familiar with thinkers like Noam Chomsky, Paul Krugman, David Brooks, or Robert Rich might find
my heroes. Those are my heroes.
Yes, they're your heroes in your work. So how do you see your perspectives aligning with and potentially differing from these individuals?
Okay, of them all, Chomsky is probably closest to my attitudes. And I was honored when he replied. I had a very early draft of this book. This is actually what was intended to be a collection of essays I kept sending off to the New York Times that they never published. And I finally sent it to Chomsky, and he replied, in a sentence, and I chose the best two words, interesting work. And he said, I'm retired emeritus professor, and I no longer have any teaching assistants, so I can't tell you how to get this published right now. So that was fine. David Brooks is probably the one I agree with most often as the most conservative voice of the New York Times. And I think he does marvelous work, and he does excellent work outside of writing in trying to build community in the United States of America, which I think is the Lord's work. And I think Robert Reich, I loved his movie based upon what essentially are his classroom lectures at Berkeley on economics and what happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s and 2000s. Which essentially is what my book is. My book is essentially my lesson plans in writing, whereas his were his lesson plans, being videotaped. And then Krugman he's a Nobel Prize winner for good reason.
So, Mr. Sawatzki, there's also part in your book talking about political polarization. There was
Yes.
certain expressed move the nation forward and bridge divides. So, what strategies or approaches do you believe are most effective in fostering constructive dialogue on these certain issues?
What's interesting is Trump is starting to talk about something I've been talking about for decades. Challenging the licenses of television broadcasters. I've been thinking for decades we needed to be doing that Fox News for decades on every single one of those because they have to be renewed on a regular basis. And the citizens of the broadcast area are allowed to challenge the license and question whether or not they have been operating because they get the airways for free as a public service as to whether or not they're fulfilling their duties as a public service of fair and balanced reporting. Also, I just like to shut down Fox News on the basis that the person who owns it isn't a U.S. citizen. Come on, he's an Australian Brit, and he doesn't even live here.
Yeah. So
why does he get to run all that network?
Mr. Sawatzki, there's also pressing issues right now about freedom of speeches. Freedom.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. Intimidation. Yes. Paranoia strikes deep. Into your heart it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. And somebody's on something from the 1960s song. All right. But, yeah, Trump's after that for sure. And the whole idea that we export dissident opinions is like the least American thing. The founding fathers have got to be turning over in their graves. Thomas Paine was an import. Thomas Paine was an import to the United States. Alexander Hamilton, just watched the musical, was an import to the United States. And they had revolutionary thoughts. They made us who we are. George Washington was a freaking Tory during the French Indian War before he became the leader of the American independence movie. None of them are completely clean from accusations of foreignness, if that's a word even.
There's so very many immigrants who are very successful in USA right now.
Well, hell, Lewis and Clark wouldn't have survived without Sacagawea, and she wasn't even allowed citizenship or voting rights.
So, Mr. Sawatzki, for someone just starting to engage with political issues, which is saying...
Oh, no, I'm not just starting. I've had my entire career since I was a teenager involved in politics one way or the other. If you read the intro to my book, my oldest memory is holding yard signs for Barry Goldwater for president in 1964 for my father, who had definite libertarian attitudes.
I mean, in the question, Mr. Sawatzki, for those readers
readers
start
right.
to engage with political issues. Which essay in your book might you recommend to them to read first?
Oh, which of the chapters?
Yes, that could
God,
really enlighten them too.
maybe the last chapter. Just let's see. Let's get past that. Just a chapter. Why progressivism will triumph politically eventually. First paragraph. Peter Parker, alter ego of Marvel Comics Spider-Man, may be best known for his iconic motto, quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." Spider-Man canon attributes the saying to Peter's Uncle Ben, who, by the way, got killed because Spider-Man's in action.
Yeah.
Ignoring the latent paternalism of this sentence, let us take it as a moral truth for this chapter at least. Get involved.
Yes. You also mentioned in your book, Mr. Sawatzki, that civics are social contract also in our country.
They are. they're, okay, so if you want to get really into the weeds, I don't know how far you want to get in the reeds as a political science major. So concepts of nation states themselves are a social construct. They don't exist naturally. Sapiens, an excellent book by an Israeli guy that I don't have the name off the top of my head because it's Israeli name, but it's called Sapiens. And he's written 2 books since then that are excellent. And basically points out that nation states are quite a recent phenomenon. Now, were they useful for economic development and international trade and progress? Yes. And legal, and legal processes? Yes. But let's not forget that they exist because we make them exist. So you don't get to not be involved the way too many people talk about politics. Oh, I'm not into politics. I don't do politics. You don't get a choice. If you want to live in a civilized society, you have to have an internal revenue service, which, by the way, literally is carved into the top of the Internal Revenue Service. It was Justice Brandeis, if I remember correctly. Taxes are the price one pays for a civilized society. And I don't mind paying taxes. I voted for Bernie Sanders.
So also, Mr. Sawatsky, there are certain topic that I'm so very agreeing on it, especially on the electoral college system.
Yeah.
Mentioned.
Isn't that okay? So, as I mentioned, in 1975, that was the debate topic nationally, and I'm quite sure you weren't even born yet.
Yeah, I'm not yet born at that time.
Okay, so isn't that a little bit sad that we're still under the a relic? I mean, come on, there's been 27 amendments to the United States Constitution, and we couldn't get rid of the Electoral College somewhere along the way.
Year by year, it's so very confusing, Mr. Sawatsky, on how this electoral college would really.
Well, it's minority rule. Let's face it. The smaller states have a disproportionate number of the share of representatives in Congress because they're all guaranteed 2 senators. And the fact is, Wyoming shouldn't have 2 senators. They should only qualify for 1. And same with North Dakota and Alaska. I mean, they're just not populated enough. I mean, California should have 4 senators. Texas should probably have 4 senators. New York should have 3. Florida should have 3. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense other than the fact that at the very beginning, they decided that there would be a basis on white property owning males and 2 votes so the small states didn't feel intimidated by New York of the original 13 states. Florida wasn't even a state then, was it?
So do you really think, Mr. Sawatsky, there's a need for an amendment to this electoral
Yes.
system?
But I'm thinking that passing the Equal Rights Amendment nationally probably should be a priority based upon the fact that 52% of citizens are female. And then maybe we can get the Electoral College.
Hopefully, that would be the very priority also for the equality rights. So, looking ahead also, Mr. Sawatzki, what are your hopes for the impact of fixing America on public discourse and policy making? Are there any specific actions you hope readers will take after engaging with your ideas?
Yes. Show up at your local Democratic or Republican monthly meetings. There's one in every city. There's one at least in every county. And there's going to be a Democratic one, and there's going to be a Republican one. And I don't care which one you go to. Go there, get involved in your community. So I used to tell my students during my civics unit, I would show them pictures of protests across the United States where people are chanting, "This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. This is what..." No, it doesn't. That's not democracy. That's protest. And then I would show them the initial reading of a bill in the House of Representatives of Olympia, Washington, where they're just reading the text of the bill into the record. And I would say, this is what democracy looks like. And they would go, but that looks boring.
Maybe they need to be more.
And that's why I made them get engaged in one law each year.
I agree on that, Mr. Sawatzki.
So they would know then, they would take some ownership of, by the way, a bill for which they were not allowed to vote for because they weren't old enough. And I used to tell them, just because you can't vote doesn't mean you don't have political power.
It's very important to exercise our suffrage, our right to suffrage. So, Mr. Sawatzki, we're coming to an end with our interview. So, can you show it to our viewers, your book? And can you tell us or our viewers where they can purchase it one? Or
well, booklocker.com has it online. Amazon has it online with 12 reviews. It can be purchased in Europe. This one actually was purchased in Europe because I autographed my last copy, gave it away. So I had to buy this from Germany because Germany is still part of the EU. So I couldn't buy it from the United Kingdom because it would get caught up in customs in Portugal. So I got this within 1 week in Europe. Mind you, it cost me much more than what it cost me in the United States. But, you know, I knew I needed it for this interview. That was made very clear to me by my publicist. Finally, if you don't like to read, if you're a human being who doesn't like to read, simply go on Amazon and purchase all 7 seasons of West Wing. It's not that expensive. And just watch all 7 seasons of West Wing. It's probably better education than I could give you.
so, lastly, are there any future works or projects or
Yes,
as
I'm finishing one right now called Portuguese Experiences, based upon my last 2.5 years here and all the people I've met internationally, because I live at Praia del Rei, which is an international golf course, and I'm on the first tee. It originally was built around a Marriott hotel, and so every 2 weeks, essentially, there's 200 new people visiting on vacation, and that's 200 more people for me to engage in conversation. And I learn lots of things from lots of people with lots of perspectives. One of the first most interesting things I learned was from an Irish sports writer who was visiting his parents who had retired to Portugal. And he said, it's not Northern Ireland. It's the north of Ireland.
North.
They
The North.
still consider it unliberated territory.
So there is a the in the North.
The grammar is very interesting.
Because I also know it's Northern Ireland during our EU subjects in political science. So that's the north of Ireland.
Yeah, you don't know. In Ireland, they don't say Northern Ireland.
Oh,
They say the north of Ireland, which they consider occupied territory.
that's great learning. So that's
That,
the
I'm saying, even
Even
after the Easter Agreement or the Good Friday Agreement, there's still tension. And by the way, the Wales don't like the English anymore. The English like the Scots.
That's very true, Mr. Sawatzki. I've heard that one. So, Mr. Sawatzki,
But they're all very good mates when you're talking to them at a vacation.
yeah. So, Mr. Sawatzki, so last question. But how was working with Script and Bookwrights House?
Oh, it's been excellent. It's been absolutely wonderful. In fact, I've had multiple people approach me, but Bookwrights and Mr. Wolf have been extremely responsive and helpful. And pleasure to meet you too. So I thought I was going to be talking to Shane Rowlands, but apparently not. You're not. You don't look like a Shane. Not to be stereotypical. But it was been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sawatzki. So this comes to the end of our interview. Thank you so much for your time and your talking about your insights and your perspective and in your astounding essays about your book,
Thank you.
Sing America. So thank you
It's like
so
I could use an endorsement from David Brooks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sawatzki. I have a great pleasure of time talking about your book also and talking about the current issues in our country. Thank you.
Well, ciao.
Thank you. Goodbye, Mr. Sawatzki.
Bye-bye.
Bye.